What if one of the most important decisions you make for your long-term health happens before you've even finished your first cup of coffee? Most people worry about aging when they notice wrinkles. They worry when their joints begin to ache, when their energy starts disappearing earlier in the day, when recovery takes longer than it used to, when names become harder to remember, when routine medical appointments begin revealing numbers they don't like. But by the time those signs appear, the biological changes responsible for them have often been developing quietly for years. And that's what concerns me. Because aging doesn't usually arrive all at once. It happens gradually, silently, cell by cell, signal by signal. Most people believe these changes are simply unavoidable consequences of getting older. They assume that after a certain age, the body naturally begins shutting down. That declining energy, slower healing, and increasing vulnerability to disease are just part of the package. But what if that isn't the whole story? What if many of the systems responsible for maintaining your health are still present, still functional, and simply waiting for the right signals to become active? And what if one of those signals is connected to something millions of people consume every single morning? Coffee. Now, this is not another debate about whether coffee is healthy or unhealthy. You've probably seen enough headlines making those arguments. One week coffee is a miracle. The next week it's a problem. Then another study appears and everyone changes their minds again. The truth is far more interesting. The question isn't whether you drink coffee. The question is whether you're preparing it in a way that preserves the compounds your body can actually use. Because two people can drink coffee every morning for years and experience very different biological effects. One may be receiving a rich supply of compounds linked to cellular maintenance, inflammatory balance, and healthy aging. The other may unknowingly be destroying a significant portion of those compounds before the coffee even reaches their bloodstream. And here's the troubling part. The most common mistake is also one of the easiest mistakes to make. In fact, millions of people repeat it every single day. Today, I'm going to show you why the way you prepare your coffee may matter far more than most people realize. We'll explore what researchers have discovered about stem cells, inflammation, blood vessel formation, and cellular renewal. We'll examine findings from major institutions that have spent years studying the relationship between coffee consumption and long-term health outcomes. And I'll show you a simple morning protocol that takes only minutes but may help preserve some of the most valuable compounds naturally found in coffee. My name is Dr. James Carter. For decades, I've followed research on aging, cellular repair, chronic disease, and the biological mechanisms that influence how well we maintain our health as the years pass. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Aging is not simply about getting older. It's about the signals your body receives every day. Some signals encourage repair, others encourage decline. Some strengthen resilience, others slowly weaken it. The choices we repeat every morning often matter far more than the dramatic changes we make once or twice a year. But before we talk about coffee, you need to understand something most people never learn. Inside your body exists a remarkable repair system that has been working continuously since the day you were born. And understanding that system changes the way you think about aging forever. Imagine one of the world's busiest airports operating 24 hours a day. Thousands of passengers move through it constantly. Aircraft arrive and depart every few minutes. Fuel systems operate around the clock. Electrical networks power critical equipment. Runways endure enormous stress every single day. Now imagine what would happen if nothing was ever repaired. A cracked section of runway would become larger. A damaged light would remain broken. Small mechanical problems would eventually become major failures. The airport couldn't function for very long. That's why every major airport maintains highly trained repair teams. These teams aren't waiting until something collapses. They're constantly monitoring, responding, and restoring what needs attention. Your body operates in much the same way. Every day, normal life creates wear and tear inside your tissues. Cells become damaged, proteins break down, inflammation occurs, microscopic injuries develop. This is completely normal. What keeps you healthy is your ability to repair that damage. And one of the most important components of that repair process involves stem cells. When many people hear the phrase stem cells, they think of futuristic medical treatments. But your body naturally contains stem cells right now. They exist in bone marrow, blood vessels, fat tissue, and other regions throughout the body. Their role is simple but extraordinarily important. They help support repair, regeneration, and renewal throughout the body. Think of them as specialized repair crews waiting for instructions. When tissues need support, signals are sent. When those signals are received, repair activity increases. When communication works efficiently, the body maintains itself remarkably well. This is one reason younger people often recover more quickly. The repair systems respond faster. The communication pathways are stronger. The biological instructions are clearer. But something changes as we grow older. Interestingly, researchers have discovered that many stem cells do not simply disappear with age. Instead, the environment surrounding them changes. Communication becomes less efficient. Chronic inflammation increases. Metabolic stress accumulates. Poor sleep creates additional biological strain. Years of exposure to physical and psychological stress add more noise to the system. Imagine trying to hear an important announcement in a crowded stadium during a championship game. The announcement is still being made. The speakers are still working, but the surrounding noise makes the message difficult to hear. Something very similar may happen inside the aging body. The repair crews remain available, the signals still exist, but the message becomes weaker. As a result, recovery slows. Resilience declines. Tissues become less responsive. The body gradually loses some of its ability to renew itself. For years, many scientists assumed this process was largely unavoidable. Today, that view is changing. Research increasingly suggests that certain lifestyle factors may influence the signals associated with stem cell activity. Exercise appears to matter. Sleep appears to matter. Inflammation appears to matter. And surprisingly, certain naturally occurring compounds found in foods and beverages may also play a role. Among the most studied of those beverages is coffee. But stem cells are only one piece of a much larger story. Because while your body's repair systems are becoming less responsive with age, another battle may be unfolding quietly in the background. A battle involving abnormal cells, a battle involving blood vessels, and a battle that most people never realize is happening at all. To understand why certain coffee compounds have attracted so much scientific attention, we first need to talk about something called angiogenesis. And that begins with a hidden process taking place inside the human body every single day. Before we talk about brewing methods, cinnamon, mushrooms, or any morning protocol, we need to answer an important question. Why are scientists even interested in coffee in the first place? After all, coffee is one of the most consumed beverages in the world. People drink it for energy. They drink it for focus. They drink it because it's part of their morning routine. Yet over the last 2 decades, researchers studying aging, inflammation, and long-term health began noticing something unexpected. Certain groups of regular coffee drinkers consistently appeared to experience different health outcomes than researchers anticipated. That observation led to a deeper question. Could coffee be doing more than simply helping people feel awake? To understand why scientists became curious, we first need to discuss something that happens inside the human body every day. The appearance of abnormal cells. Every second, millions of cells throughout your body divide, repair, and replace themselves. Most of this activity occurs flawlessly, but biology is never perfect. Occasionally, mistakes occur. A cell may become damaged, DNA may be copied incorrectly. Proteins may not function exactly as intended. Fortunately, the body has numerous systems designed to deal with these problems. Immune cells patrol continuously. Repair mechanisms operate around the clock. Most abnormal cells are removed long before they become significant. But not every abnormal cell disappears immediately. Some survive. Some gather into tiny clusters. Now here's the important part. A microscopic cluster of abnormal cells is not automatically dangerous. In fact, without additional resources, many never progress very far at all. Think about a small construction project in a remote location. Even if builders arrive and begin working, growth remains limited unless infrastructure follows. Roads must be built, supplies must arrive, electricity must be available, water must reach the site. Without support systems, expansion becomes extremely difficult. Scientists have discovered that abnormal cell clusters face a similar challenge. They require access to nutrients and oxygen. And to obtain those resources, they often depend on the development of additional blood vessels. This process is called angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is not bad. In fact, it is essential for life. Your body uses angiogenesis during wound healing, tissue repair, and recovery from injury. The problem arises when biological systems designed for healing are used in places where they may not be beneficial. This is where researchers began paying attention to certain compounds naturally present in coffee. Laboratory studies revealed that coffee contains a remarkable collection of polyphenols and plant-derived molecules capable of interacting with pathways involved in inflammation, cellular signaling, and vascular regulation. Among these pathways is one associated with a signaling molecule known as VEGF. VEGF helps coordinate the formation of new blood vessels when the body needs them. Researchers became interested in whether compounds found in coffee might help support healthy regulation of these signaling pathways. Not by shutting them down, not by acting like a medication, but by helping maintain balance. And that wasn't the only surprising discovery. As scientists continued investigating coffee, they found that several of its compounds appeared to interact with multiple biological systems connected to healthy aging. Stem cell signaling, inflammatory regulation, cellular cleanup processes, blood vessel activity. The deeper researchers looked, the more interesting the story became. Which brings us to the 4 mechanisms that have made coffee one of the most studied beverages in longevity research. And the first mechanism starts with the repair crews we discussed earlier, your stem cells. When most people think about coffee, they think about caffeine. That makes sense. Caffeine is the ingredient people feel. It's the reason they become more alert. It's the reason many people reach for coffee first thing in the morning. But caffeine is only one small part of the story. Coffee contains hundreds of naturally occurring compounds, and many of the most interesting compounds have nothing to do with stimulation at all. Researchers studying coffee often focus on a group of compounds known as polyphenols. These molecules are believed to be responsible for many of the biological effects associated with coffee consumption. Let's look at 4 pathways that have attracted particular scientific attention. The first involves stem cell signaling. Earlier, we talked about stem cells as the body's repair crews. Researchers have become interested in compounds called chlorogenic acids, which are naturally abundant in coffee. These compounds appear to participate in signaling pathways associated with cellular repair and regeneration. Think of it this way: the repair crews already exist. The goal is not creating more crews. The goal is helping communication occur more effectively. One fascinating detail is that the amount of chlorogenic acid in coffee can vary dramatically depending on how the beans are roasted. And that detail becomes extremely important when we reach the protocol section later in this video. The second pathway involves blood vessel regulation. As we discussed, angiogenesis is necessary for healing and tissue maintenance. But healthy biology depends on balance. Researchers have investigated how coffee-derived compounds may interact with pathways associated with VEGF activity and vascular signaling. Again, we're talking about support for normal biological regulation, not extreme stimulation, not complete suppression. Balance. The third pathway involves inflammation. The third pathway. If there is one biological process that appears repeatedly throughout aging research, it is chronic, low-grade inflammation. Many scientists now view persistent inflammation as one of the common denominators behind numerous age-related changes. The challenge isn't acute inflammation. Acute inflammation helps protect you. The challenge is inflammation that never fully resolves, month after month, year after year. Coffee polyphenols have attracted attention because of their relationship with signaling pathways involved in inflammatory regulation. Among the most frequently discussed is a pathway associated with NF-kappa B. You don't need to remember the scientific name. What's important is understanding that researchers continue exploring how coffee compounds may help support a healthier inflammatory environment. And finally, we arrive at the 4th mechanism, cellular housekeeping. Every cell in your body contains tiny energy-producing structures called mitochondria. Over time, some mitochondria become damaged. If these damaged structures accumulate, cellular performance may decline. Fortunately, cells possess internal maintenance systems designed to identify and remove dysfunctional components. One of these processes is called mitophagy. You can think of mitophagy as preventative maintenance. Instead of waiting for problems to accumulate, Cells continuously remove worn-out components and replace them with healthier ones. Several coffee compounds have been investigated for their potential relationship with pathways involved in cellular cleanup and mitochondrial maintenance. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. Stem cell signaling, blood vessel regulation, inflammation management, cellular housekeeping. These are not isolated systems. They influence one another continuously. And remarkably, researchers have found that compounds naturally present in coffee appear capable of interacting with all four. Of course, mechanisms alone don't prove anything. The real question is whether these observations translate into measurable results in actual human beings. And that's exactly what researchers from Harvard, the Karolinska Institute, the NIH, and the University of California set out to investigate. What they found surprised a lot of people. At this point, we know that coffee contains compounds capable of interacting with several biological systems associated with healthy aging, but there's an important distinction we need to make. Mechanisms are interesting. Human outcomes are what really matter. A compound can look impressive in a laboratory dish and still have very little impact in the real world. That's why large human studies are so valuable. They help answer a simple question. Do people who regularly consume coffee actually experience measurable differences over time? Let's start with one of the most widely discussed observations. Researchers at Harvard followed more than 50,000 health professionals over many years, tracking lifestyle habits and long-term health outcomes. What caught researchers' attention wasn't merely coffee consumption itself. It was the consistency of the pattern. Individuals who consumed coffee regularly tended to experience different long-term outcomes than those who rarely drank it. What made the findings especially interesting was that researchers began looking beyond caffeine. They started focusing on the broader collection of compounds naturally present in coffee, particularly polyphenols, because the protective patterns being observed didn't appear to be explained by stimulation alone. Something else seemed to be contributing. A similar pattern emerged in large Scandinavian research populations. Scientists following tens of thousands of women over extended periods observed that higher coffee consumption was associated with favorable outcomes in several health categories. Again, researchers pointed toward biological mechanisms involving inflammatory regulation and growth signaling pathways rather than simple caffeine exposure. This is a recurring theme throughout coffee research. The story is rarely about caffeine. The story is usually about everything else inside the cup. Then came another intriguing observation. Researchers working with very large aging populations found that coffee consumption was associated with differences in overall mortality risk. What's especially fascinating is that similar trends were often observed among people consuming decaffeinated coffee. Think about what that means. If decaffeinated coffee produces similar associations, caffeine alone cannot explain the findings. Researchers were forced to look deeper. Their attention increasingly shifted toward chlorogenic acids, polyphenols, and other plant compounds naturally found in coffee. And then we arrive at perhaps the most interesting research of all. Studies examining biological markers directly. Instead of simply asking people how they felt, scientists began measuring what was happening inside the body: circulating stem cell populations, inflammatory markers, endothelial function, vascular health indicators, cellular signaling pathways. In several investigations, researchers observed measurable changes in these biological markers following exposure to coffee-derived polyphenols. Now, it's important to remain realistic. Coffee is not a miracle. It is not a treatment. It is not a substitute for exercise, sleep, or proper nutrition. But the consistency of the research is what continues to attract scientific interest. Across different countries, different populations, different study designs, researchers repeatedly find evidence suggesting that coffee may be doing far more than helping people wake up in the morning. And that brings us to the question most people actually want answered. If coffee contains these beneficial compounds, how do you preserve as many of them as possible? Because here's something many people never realize. The way coffee is prepared can dramatically influence what ends up in your cup. Two people may start with similar beans and finish with very different results. One preserves key compounds. The other destroys a substantial portion of them before taking the first sip. So, if your goal is to maximize the compounds researchers find most interesting, what would the ideal morning coffee routine actually look like? Let's build it step by step. If I wanted to build a coffee routine designed to preserve as many beneficial compounds as possible, this is where I would start. The first decision happens before the coffee is even brewed. Choose a light or medium roast. This may surprise people who associate darker coffee with greater strength. But from a polyphenol perspective, darker is not necessarily better. Many of the compounds researchers find most interesting, including chlorogenic acids, are more abundant in lighter roasts. The longer and hotter beans are roasted, the more some of these compounds decline. That doesn't mean dark roast is bad. It simply means that if your goal is maximizing polyphenol content, light and medium roasts deserve serious consideration. The second step involves brewing temperature. Extremely high temperatures can degrade delicate plant compounds. For most brewing methods, a temperature range just below boiling is generally preferred. If you're using freshly boiled water, allowing it to rest briefly before brewing may help preserve more of the compounds you're trying to capture. The third addition may sound simple, but it has received growing attention among health enthusiasts. Ceylon cinnamon. Not ordinary cassia cinnamon. True Ceylon cinnamon. Ceylon contains a unique collection of plant compounds that many researchers find interesting because of their relationship with oxidative stress and metabolic health. A small amount is usually all that's needed. The goal is not overwhelming the coffee. The goal is complementing it. Next comes an ingredient that has become increasingly popular in longevity circles: lion's mane mushroom. Lion's mane has attracted attention because of research examining its relationship with nerve growth factors and cognitive health. While research is still evolving, many people choose to combine small amounts with coffee as part of a broader wellness routine. Another surprisingly useful addition is a tiny amount of black pepper. This has less to do with flavor and more to do with bioavailability. Black pepper contains compounds that may help improve the absorption of certain plant-derived molecules. Only a very small amount is needed. In most cases, you won't even notice it's there. Now let's discuss one of the most controversial recommendations in this entire protocol. Avoid dairy milk if your primary goal is maximizing polyphenol availability. Research suggests that proteins naturally present in dairy may bind to certain polyphenols, potentially reducing how much ultimately becomes available for absorption. This doesn't mean dairy is unhealthy. It simply means that from a polyphenol perspective, alternatives such as unsweetened oat milk or coconut milk may be worth considering. Timing also matters. Many researchers interested in metabolic health prefer consuming coffee earlier in the day, particularly during the morning hours. Some evidence suggests that biological signaling pathways associated with repair and metabolism may be especially responsive during this period. Another simple habit is often overlooked. Drink water alongside your coffee. Hydration supports circulation, and circulation is ultimately how nutrients, oxygen, signaling molecules, and repair cells move throughout the body. Coffee and water work better together than many people realize. Now let's talk about several upgrades that can make this protocol even stronger. First, consider pairing coffee with morning movement. Whether it's a walk, resistance training session, or moderate exercise routine, physical activity activates many of the same systems involved in repair and regeneration. The combination may be more powerful than either habit alone. Second, be cautious with sugar. Large amounts of added sugar can create metabolic effects that work against many of the goals people are trying to achieve. If sweetness is necessary, less is generally better. Third, grind your beans shortly before brewing whenever possible. Coffee begins losing aromatic compounds and freshness after grinding. Freshly ground beans often provide a noticeably different experience. Finally, focus on consistency rather than quantity. This may be the most important lesson of all. Many people assume more coffee automatically means better results. Research rarely supports that mindset. Healthy habits create change through repetition, not through occasional extremes. A thoughtfully prepared cup enjoyed consistently over months is likely far more valuable than constantly searching for the next miracle solution. But before you start making changes tomorrow morning, there's one more thing you need to know, because there are 4 mistakes people make every day that can quietly undermine almost everything we've discussed so far. And the first mistake is incredibly common. By now, you've probably realized something important. The conversation we've had today was never really about caffeine. It was never about getting an energy boost. And it was never about finding a miracle drink. It was about understanding how small daily habits can influence biological systems that have been working for you your entire life. But before we finish, there are 4 common mistakes that deserve attention, because many people do almost everything right and still undermine the very benefits they're hoping to gain. The first mistake is assuming darker coffee is automatically better coffee. This misconception is everywhere. People often associate dark roast with strength. They assume a bolder flavor must mean a more powerful health effect. But those are two completely different things. A stronger taste doesn't necessarily mean a richer concentration of the compounds researchers are interested in. In many cases, extended roasting reduces levels of certain naturally occurring polyphenols. That's why one of the simplest changes many people can make is choosing a light or medium roast more often. The second mistake is adding ingredients without considering what they do to absorption. Many people carefully choose quality coffee and then immediately reduce its potential value through the additions they mix into it. Again, this doesn't mean certain ingredients are unhealthy. It simply means that if your goal is maximizing the availability of coffee's plant compounds, understanding these interactions becomes important. Sometimes the smallest changes create the biggest difference. The third mistake is expecting immediate results. This may be the most common mistake of all. We live in a culture that expects instant feedback. People start a new habit on Monday and expect to feel dramatically different by Friday. Biology doesn't usually work that way. The systems we've discussed today operate gradually: cellular repair, inflammatory balance, metabolic adaptation. These are processes that unfold over weeks, months, and years. The people who benefit most from healthy habits are rarely the people searching for quick fixes. They're the people who remain consistent long enough for those habits to compound. The fourth mistake is believing supplements can automatically replace the original food. This happens constantly. Someone hears about a compound found in coffee. A supplement appears promising to isolate that compound. And suddenly people assume the capsule must be superior. But nature is rarely that simple. Coffee contains hundreds of compounds interacting together. Scientists are still trying to understand many of those relationships. When researchers study coffee, they're often studying the complete package rather than a single isolated ingredient. That distinction matters. Now, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Earlier in this video, I asked you to consider two people reaching older age with dramatically different levels of health and resilience. One remains active, engaged, and independent. The other struggles with recovery, energy, and physical function. Most people assume the difference must be luck, or genetics, or something completely outside their control. But the longer researchers study aging, the more evidence suggests that daily signals matter. The body is listening all the time: every meal, every night of sleep, every period of movement, every period of inactivity, every morning routine. These signals accumulate, not over days, over years, and eventually those accumulated signals become the reality we experience. The encouraging news is that many of the systems we've discussed today are still present inside you. Your body still maintains repair mechanisms. Your body still monitors abnormal cells. Your body still regulates inflammation. Your body still performs cellular cleanup and maintenance. The question is not whether these systems exist. The question is whether your daily habits support them. That's why I find coffee so interesting. Not because it's magical, not because it can solve every health problem, but because it represents something larger. A simple daily ritual that millions of people already practice. A habit that can potentially be optimized without spending thousands of dollars, buying complicated equipment, or completely redesigning your life. Let's quickly review what we've learned. Coffee contains naturally occurring compounds that researchers continue studying for their relationship with stem cell signaling, inflammatory balance, blood vessel regulation, and cellular maintenance. Light and medium roasts generally preserve more of certain polyphenols than darker roasts. Ingredients such as Ceylon cinnamon, lion's mane, and even a small amount of black pepper are often used by people seeking to complement coffee's naturally occurring compounds. Morning timing, hydration, exercise, and consistency may all influence the overall effectiveness of the routine. And perhaps most importantly, long-term results are shaped by repetition, not perfection. You don't need to change everything overnight. You don't need to chase every new health trend. You simply need to make slightly better choices more consistently. That's how meaningful change usually happens. One decision, one morning, one habit at a time. If today's discussion gave you a new perspective on coffee, aging, or the remarkable systems working inside your body every day, I encourage you to share this information with someone you care about: a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a friend who wants to stay healthy and independent for as long as possible. Because sometimes the most valuable health information isn't complicated. Sometimes it's simply understanding the habits we already practice and learning how to practice them a little better. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm Dr. James Carter. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video.